Hello, my name is Lawrence Robinson. I'm a medical doctor, born and raised in Philadelphia. Grew up in West Philadelphia, went to Overbrook High School. When I was in high school and during that time, I became involved with a program called AFNA. AFNA was headed by a man named Samuel Evans, well known here in Philadelphia. And he had a program that introduced youth from the community to various programs in medicine and law. I became part of that program and joined the medical aspect of that program. Through his tutelage and guidance, I was able to graduate from high school and go to Harvard University, where I got my bachelor's degree. After finishing my bachelor's degree, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my medical degree and became a medical doctor. Completing my degree in medicine, I went on to do a residency. The first year of that residency was done in Chicago at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's. From there, I went to Johns Hopkins to do my residency and my master's of public health. After leaving there, I went to Harlem Hospital, which was under the direction of Columbia Presbyterian. And I got a position as an assistant professor of medicine at Columbia University, and I was the director of the hypertension program. From there, I was hanging out in New York, having a wonderful time there, being a professor. But it was actually my parents who decided that they wanted me to come back to Philadelphia to help them because they were getting older. And they were the ones who put my name in to become the commissioner of public health for Philadelphia. And I managed to get the position as deputy health commissioner. And that's how I ended up here in Philadelphia. I occupied that position for about 16 years. And now I want to do some of the things that Mr. Evans said. So he used to tell me, he would say, Dr. Robinson, he said, Robbie, that's actually the term that he used. Why are you sitting here with all of this information that you have acquired and it's locked up in your head? He says, you should be out sharing this information. And that's why I came up with the ideal of the insightful journal. It'll be a mechanism for me to get some of the thoughts that I have been acquiring over these years to you, the listeners, so that you can learn from my experiences and from the knowledge that I've acquired. Welcome to the Insightful Journal. I'm Dr. Lawrence Robinson, a medical doctor with a master's in public health, and we're here to talk about issues on health that will be very insightful to you. Today, we have as our guest Dr. Angela Walker, an expert in the area of maternal and child health, which will be our topic today. Dr. Walker, please
Yes,
give
hello.
a introduction to yourself and tell me a little bit about your background.
Okay. I am a physician, as you know. I actually got certified in internal medicine and also did a master's in public health. I worked at the Centers for Disease Control, and I did a fellowship in Boston University in women's health. Um, on my journey, I had an opportunity to go to the Amazon jungle, and I actually witnessed what women went through there in the jungle. And I'm talking about the indigenous people, the indigenous women in the Amazon. And I was tasked with having to address with them issues related to nutrition, fetal nutrition, nutrition of their children, and their own health after having had babies. So it was very interesting. Um, Now, since then, I have I started working with the state. So I work with the Commonwealth at the moment. But I have a very long history in public health and in disease prevention and health promotion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. Those are some impressive credentials. I didn't know that you actually spent time in the Amazon. That's very interesting. We'll talk about that later. But this issue of maternal and child health and infant mortality is a really very serious problem in our community. Infant mortality actually is a good gauge of how healthy and how well a society is. And unfortunately, here in America, even though we spend the most money on healthcare and we have the most advanced systems, in certain neighborhoods and certain areas, we have very high infant mortality rates. I was a health commissioner, deputy health commissioner for the city under Rendell and Street many years ago, and I had the opportunity to work with the maternal and child health program. We had something called the Healthy Start program here in Philadelphia. And the reason why we had the Healthy Start program is because of the high rate of infant mortality that we had. And we looked at it as the number of deaths per thousand. It's really very high here in Philadelphia. Dr. Walker, can you tell me a little bit about the high infant mortality rate that we have in this city, and what do you think are some of the major causes for this?
Well, one of the reasons we have that is the fact that there is no education or health education in the schools, particularly when it regard to reproductive health. You have young girls, 15, even younger, who are getting pregnant, and sometimes they don't even know that's when they have a belly that's expanding, that that's a pregnancy. So what happens is there's very little decent sex education or reproductive health education starting at an early age. I will tell you that when I went into the jungle, the women there were having their babies at the age of 12, and the community was with them and supported them. That is not something that we necessarily have. We do not have a good support for young women, young ladies, young men who are facing reproductive issues, and that includes young boys becoming men in high school. So we're talking about adolescence. I have the other thing is that uh, health in general is not something that is a priority for adolescents. So you have children that are smoking, they have poor nutrition, they have a lot of stress. Okay, they sometimes they don't sleep for days or hours or days. So in general, their health is not good. Um, as far as what we know about things like smoking and drugs, how they affect alcohol, they affect pregnancies, and so you get high infant mortality rates simply from the exposure to toxins such as alcohol and drugs. But overall, what we have is very low support systems right today for adolescents in their early ages of reproduction. It's left up to sort of like, you have a dartboard and you have some darts and you throw the darts and you think you're going to hit the bullseye, and basically you're missing the bullseye.
I would agree with you. One of the issues that I also addressed when I was the deputy health commissioner for the city was the issue of sexually transmitted diseases. So one of the things that we found out as well is that there were very high rates of chlamydia in these populations as well, and these young people. I mean, and this was actually at the level of middle school. So these weren't even high school. These children were like at schools like Sayre and various schools like that. And certainly, if you have a sexually transmitted disease like chlamydia, which is undiagnosed, that's going to have a negative impact on the pregnancy as well. Dr. Walker?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with the fact. I did want to bring up the sexually transmitted diseases right away, because what happens is we know about the stigma around that. So when you have children or teenagers that are having sex and then they get a sexually transmitted disease, basically they're not going to necessarily tell their parents, or they
Right.
might not even tell their partners. So a lot of stuff gets missed. And what happens is many of these children, these adolescents, show up at an emergency room pregnant and also with a sexually transmitted disease. That is not good for having good prenatal care.
Most
But
certainly.
if you
Most
talk,
certainly it's
yeah,
not. So, one of the issues which I found is really very interesting is that it's a little late when you try to do your intervention once the person is already pregnant. Because, as we
absolutely.
know, the first trimester actually is the main area where the baby is developed. And if you don't have the right vitamins and various things during those first 3 months, you're going to have a low birth weight infant. And the problem is that all of the programs that we have, they don't even start to address the person until after that point. Well, how could they? Many times the person doesn't even know that they're pregnant. So there certainly has to be a paradigm change in terms of how we address this issue of maternal and child health in our community if we're going to really have a impact on it.
I think that's important. It's not right to scare people or make people feel upset because of these issues. But I think if we can come up with some real workable solutions, that's better. I actually agree with you about the fact that reproductive health does not start when you have your first pregnancy. So what happens is, I think we need to start earlier in actually educating children, educating adolescents about sexual behavior, sexuality. That's very important. I know there's been pushback from various groups that that should not happen. I know there's pushback from people who are saying, well, that should be in the home, but sometimes that can't happen in the home for various reasons. I think there's a way to address reproductive health and sexuality starting as early, and I'm talking about even before puberty or just around puberty. Now, what I'm hearing is puberty is starting a little bit earlier, but if you start this starting in middle school, it can work. And I know that there have been studies that have been done. There are particular studies that came out of Maryland where teenagers were they had to carry an egg home and take care of it as a part. The boys had to do that, and that was teaching them about, well, if you're going to have sex, you can have a baby and you have to take care of it. There are things out there that we can do, and I still think we should start doing that around the time of puberty.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal. Today we have as our guest Daryl Addison, a botanist and the owner of Torpedo Pods, a very innovative way to grow fresh fruits and vegetables. He's going to tell us all about the torpedo pods and about how food is health and how it's connected to our life and longevity. Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. I appreciate you inviting me onto the podcast.
So tell me a little bit about the torpedo pod, what it is, how you came up with the ideal. Give us a little background about the torpedo pod.
When we first started out, I realized that I wasn't able to provide healthy food for my family. So I figured if no one else is going to help me to do that, I had to do it myself. Torpedo pot is a self-growing planter that all you do is put your seeds in your plants inside the planter, and it literally grows your plants for you. It requires no human involvement as far as the growing is concerned. It's designed to create a cradle, a loving environment for the plant that eliminates all the toxicities, the bacteria, and the negative fungus that would normally attack the plant. And at the same time, feed the plant, nurture it, and grow it so that it can produce a huge amount of food. And when this happens, the plants simply just flourish and take off, and you produce hundreds of pounds of food within these small containerized gardening growing systems.
That sounds very wonderful. I'm certainly looking for something like that myself. we're all limited in terms of our space. And I like to have fresh fruits and vegetables. I know I can't get them by buying them in the store. And so I try to grow a little bit of the herbs and, various fruits like tomatoes and things like that myself. And I was looking
Mhm.
at your pod, and I think that this will be a remarkable way to grow fresh fruits and vegetables. Do you have one of the pods nearby so we can take a look at it?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I could walk around and get it. And I'm sorry I wasn't prepared for this, but I can go get it if you want me to.
Okay, well, we'll look at it later on because I certainly want people to see what it looks like. And tell me a little bit about how it works. One of the things I noticed that you have soil in it. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was discussing with the one of the state owners in Nigeria, and I said, in Nigeria you have over 200 million people, which means that you have over 1 billion growing containers, and not one of them is capable of growing food effectively, organically. So what the torpedo pod does, it's an advanced irrigation system, number one, that allows water to flow through and feed the plants. Plants like to be fed on a regular watering cycle. Number two, it nurtures the plant's root system to ensure proper growth. Its design has been laid out to allow the plant's root system to wrap around that particular planter at two different levels. Number three, it inhibits all types of toxicity. Most of the planters that we discussed in Nigeria and other places around the world, they really are toxic environments for the plant, toxic in many different ways. In one way, the containers leach into the plant's environment, which may not or may kill a plant, but they end up into the plant's biology, and that in itself ends up uh, the mouth. And thirdly, what it does is that it also inhibits bacterial growth. This is the containers that we use are designed not to have dead spaces. That means no bacteria can grow, nothing fungal can grow in these dead spaces that would inhibit the plant's environment. And fourthly, it's act like a saturation chamber. So what it is, it allows water to flow in and out of the chamber, only holding about 40% of the water, so that the water can actually pass through and leave what's necessary water in there. We realize that most of the planting systems that are out there, they either choke the plant and die and kill all the microorganisms because they flood their chambers, or they allow water to pass through and they become dry and they just die out. And you have to rebuild that microbial growth. So when you put all these things together in terms of its overall design, we created that circular design because we realized that we need to take full advantage of the sun and the rain and everything else is there. So it gives each plant the ability to take advantage of the full advantage of that environment. But when you look at it in its totality, we have to ask ourselves, we're not really in the business of growing plants. To tell you the truth, Torpedo Pot really doesn't care about the plants. We do in the long term, but short term plants are not a concern. Because everything I explained, Dr. Robinson, is really about developing that microbial environment. These chambers have been designed to create a microbial environment, so allow them to produce and to flourish, because nobody can grow a plant, but these microorganisms can do it.
Mhm.
So we create a biotic chamber that creates a balance in that plant's environment where you can adjust it anytime you want to have it grow as much as you want food or as less as you want in terms of food and beautiful plants.
That's interesting. Do you have to fertilize it, or how do you have to put nutrients? What do you do in order to feed the plants?
Yeah, that's a great question, Doc. And everybody asks me, Daryl, see, what we try to tell people is that when you look at the soil, the plant itself does not come from the soil. It grows in the soil. So the soil is just allows a plant to reach. What's in the soil? Soil is comprised of rat poo, bird poo, industrial waste. It's comprised of a lot of different things. And all living organisms find their place by eating off of what's ever in that, what we call soil. Some soils we've walked on and we compressed it so much that it has no oxygen in it, so therefore living organisms can't live. Some have been able to flourish, and there's a lot of gases coming out of it because the living organisms, they produce gas and they produce other chemicals, bionutrients for the plants. So what we recommend for our clients, there's two major types of soil on the marketplace. One is a miracle type like Grove soil. And these are what we call, they're not real soil, they're supplemented soil. And these are soils that have been, as we say, chemicals have been included into the soil so they can release these nutrients over a long period of time. Once these nutrients are released, the soil is no longer any good. And then we have the second type of soil that we prefer, and that is where plants really come from. How do plants grow? Plants eat other plants. So what we tell people is that the fungal environment that's in that soil, not only does the fungus pass through the roots of the plant system, but it builds and finds itself in the body of the plant.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal, where we recognize that injustice in healthcare is the most egregious and, in fact, the most inhumane. I'm very excited today to have our guest, DeAndrea Bolden, the author of Black Health, considered from a holistic perspective. This is going to be a very interesting discussion that we're going to have today. And let me just find out some information, first of all. You know, I always wonder what holistic health is. Can you tell me what this is, what holistic healthcare is?
When I guess my working definition may be a little different than other people's, but when I say holistic health, it just means considering all the components and factors that can impact a person's overall total health. And so my definition of holistic health includes obviously physical health, your mental health, spiritual health, financial health, social health, environmental health, and even a person's sexual health. And so there are a lot of things that affect our well-being just in general, you know, as a person. I think a lot of people are moving away from the, you know, health just means your mental health or just your physical health, but we have to look at some of the factors and components that can affect them in a negative manner. Or positively.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a good statement that you make there, because I'm a medical doctor, and I know that as a medical doctor, we separate out the other components and we only deal with one thing. And I always have said, as a medical doctor, how can you separate the body from the mind? You know, they go together. And the way I look at it is it's both a physical, it's a mental, and it's a spiritual aspect that we have to deal with whenever we look at health. So I see we're really right on the right page in terms of this.
Absolutely.
I'm very excited about that. So you wrote a book about Black health. Can you tell me a little bit about your book, and also give me a little bit about your background and why you decided to write this book?
Okay, so a little bit about me. I hold a bachelor's in psychology with a minor in chemistry. I have a master's in counseling, and I have a master's in biomedical sciences. I've worked in, you know, corporate as well, as the nonprofit sector. And so for me, this book, which I'll show it, I think I got it on there. I have to move it backwards. I'm confused with the camera, but the book came about because I was finishing up my second master's in biomedical sciences, and I started to notice some trends, and I started to notice things when you start seeing statistics like Black people have a lower life expectancy. When you see things like certain health issues are more common in the amongst the demographics of Black males and females. When you see that we're being bombarded with a lot of health issues, but no one seems to know why. And so for me, it put me on a journey to really research, to discover, and to try to get some understanding and clarity as to what is going on with the health of Black people, specifically Black people in America.
You know, that's very interesting, because this is an issue that I have looked at from my perspective as a medical doctor. And one of the things that I found out, let's just take one example. Let's just take breast cancer as an example.
Yeah.
So when you look at breast cancer, what I found out was that Black women get breast cancer at a lower rate than the standard population. But yet, when you look at outcomes, they're much
Yeah.
worse. The cancer
Yeah.
is diagnosed at a higher stage, and the
Yeah.
life expectancy once they get it is much lower. So there's
Yep.
certainly something that's going on here that's causing that difference, because it's not the fact that we're getting diseases more, or that we're more susceptible to diseases, but it seems that when we do succumb to diseases, our outcomes are worse.
Very, very, very true. That was one thing I did see as far as some of the cancer rates that were really kind of shocking to me when I started looking at some of the cancer statistics for Black Americans. And so that is definitely spot on. When we wonder, like, why do we get more aggressive forms? Like you said, why is the prognosis and the outcome so different amongst the Black population, Black American population, when compared to others? So that's very, very important to know.
Mhm. I did a study once. I was the chairman of a group that dealt with the issue of cancer. It was the National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer. And what a lot of people try to attribute these disparities to are what they call socio-economic conditions. So they say the
Okay.
reason why our health is so bad is because we're poor and we're uneducated and we don't have access to services, blah, blah, blah. But
Mhm.
when I actually did the research, I found that that wasn't true. And let me just tell you about this research that I did. It's very interesting.
Mhm.
What I did was I went to the SEER data. SEER data is data that's collected by the National Institutes of Health on Cancer.
Mhm.
It's called the SEER data. And it's a national
Mhm.
set of data which is adjusted in terms of the zip code, census tracts, age, and so forth. So what I did was I selected a group of people from Washington, D.C., and I adjusted the data for sex, for age, for socioeconomic
Mhm.
status. And then what I did was I compared Black men to Black women.
Mhm.
Now, these people live in the same household, they have the same
Right.
economic, they eat the same food and everything. So what you find is that the incidence, cancer incidence, and prognosis and all of the rates are much higher for men than they are for women. So you
Mhm.
wonder if it's just socioeconomic conditions, then why and how do you explain this difference
Right.
between Black men and Black men and
Like
Black
women.
women who live in the same household, eat the same food, and so forth? Okay. Then
Right.
what I did was I got the data from USAID, which is Aid to Developing Countries, for
Mhm.
Haiti. Okay. Now, Haiti, as you know, has the lowest socioeconomic conditions in the
On
continent,
the word.
and the
Yeah.
genetics are very similar. Both of these groups, came from West Africa. Basically, the people in Haiti got off a little earlier before the
Right.
people came here, and it's the same mix, with the French and here we had English or whatever, and the Native American. So very similar
Mhm.
genetically. And what I found was that when we did the adjusted cancer rates, they were lower for people in Haiti. So how do
Mhm.
you explain that if it's just due to socioeconomic conditions? So basically
Right.
what this tells us is that there's something else going on, and it's not socioeconomics. It's many other things. And so
Yeah.
I get myself in trouble sometimes for pointing these things out. So what I said is that people don't want to deal with things that make them feel uncomfortable. And the
Uh-huh.
things that are
True.
truly responsible for disparities are things that are not comfortable to deal with. And
Yeah.
then I started talking about some of them, okay? There was a famous report done by the IOM, and it was
Mhm.
called Equal but Unequal Treatment. And what they
Mhm.
found is that there's institutional racism. People
Right.
get different treatments for pain and other things, because of their
Yep.
race. Okay. There's also the issue of environmental justice.
Yeah.
There's an old saying about the other side of the tracks. Well, that makes a big difference if there's a toxic dump that you're living on, where the water is poisoned and so forth. You see what I'm saying? So I laid out all of these issues. And what I argued is that there are many different factors that are
Yeah.
responsible for disparities, and we're not even collecting those factors because the SEER data doesn't even have those categories in them. So we argued that the government needed to collect additional information
Right.
so we could really get to the bottom of really what was going on. I don't know if we were too successful in that, but it's very interesting. And I know, looking at you, I see you understand that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
What you said is spot on. I think, when it comes to, whether it's health disparities, physical health, mental health, there's always multiple factors, multiple variables. And it's true. It's like if everything was based on social economic status alone, then we wouldn't see the same issues in people that were of a higher income bracket or a higher socioeconomic status. I do think what you said was spot on. We have to look at other things. That was one thing I talked about with the Black holistic health model. I talked about environmental health because sometimes individuals that may live in a lower income neighborhood, they may be more prone to environmental factors that can have a negative impact on their health, such as things being released in the air, things being released in the water, living in housing where they're exposed to lead, just a number of things. I think all those things matter. I think all those things are important. I think diet is important. When we look in, other countries, there was a study that was done and they had Africans and African Americans switch their diets. The Africans started to get sick. The African Americans started to get better. And so I do think we have to look at diet and nutrition because what we're eating is supposed to give our body the proper nutrients so that our body can function properly with the right vitamins, the right minerals, everything we need, the, essential amino acids, all that stuff. And so when we're eating diets that are deficient in nutrition, they're nutritionally deficient, they're full of chemicals and all those things. I think that's also something we have to look at when we consider the health of Black people. They may live in a food desert to where the only thing that's around is, Taco Bell, Little Caesars, Popeyes, and things that we know that traditionally are not going to be, very beneficial for your health.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal, where we recognize that injustice in healthcare is the most egregious and most inhumane. Today, I have as my guests urban agriculture and food sovereignty experts, Dr. Jamie Green and Mike Green, the Think and Grow Farms. I had the opportunity to meet with them, and it was wonderful. So please, just tell me a little bit about what you're doing with urban agriculture and what is the Greens Farm.
Sure. So I'm happy and thank you for the invitation to communicate and to share knowledge. I am the co-founder of Think and Grow Farms here in Philadelphia. We have a couple of sites. Ours are indoor farms that are really focused on the Black holistic health model that you were referencing in a prior interview that I listened to on a previous podcast, which was excellent. I wanted to share that the reason that I got into urban farming, besides the fact that we're 8 or 9 generations as farmers, was that I'm a trained cognitive psychologist, and I started to see a decline in the ability of Black children in particular, and some other disadvantaged children, but primarily Black children, to receive and process information. So their brains were not really receiving information in the last 10 years the way they had been the 10 years before. And I think in many ways, I came to the conclusion that we were not able to answer a really critical question about getting Black children into science, technology, engineering, and math, which is where my research focuses. Our children were not able to pay attention for 2 reasons. One, all of the toxins that they were exposed to from a very young age to, in some cases, they never move away from it, were incapacitating what we call executive function. Their brains were not really able to receive and process complex amounts of information. And I think the second thing that we noticed was that their diet and nutrition wasn't building up their capacity to process. So on the basis of that, I'd worked at a university for about 15 years designing STEM programs, particularly for African American children. And what we were seeing was some would really catch on and make things happen, some could not. And much of it we decided to focus on maybe if we could impact the quality of their soil and the quality of the food that's grown, we would have some way of talking about really productive, healthy Black children for the next few generations. So I'll stop there and let Mark Green, my husband and partner, share his motivation for coming into this space.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Green, co-founder of Think and Grow Farms. We started out with an agricultural training and hydroponic and aquaponic growing in 2018. We started out because I noticed that with climate change, things were changing rapidly, and pairing that with the average age of a farmer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania being 65 years of age and no clear succession plan, I knew we had to do something to make sure we had access to people of color that had access to food that was clean, nutritious, and organic. So coupled between climate change and the impacts and some of the environmental factors that we touched on a little bit earlier, I'm a North Philadelphia native, and in the area where I was raised, my elementary school is now about 100 years old. So some of the neurotoxins that we experience, be it lead or asbestos, some of these chronic conditions started when we were very young, and they did have an impact on people's health, quality of life, and even ability to learn. So we started looking at, if there's a food desert there and you don't have access to this food, how can we bring access to this food to people who are most vulnerable? So that's sort of my motivation for getting involved in this. And if we can grow indoors and control our food supply and have healthy, nutritious food, I think that would just make things a lot better, or at least sort of level the playing field for people that were already behind the 8 ball before they started.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm very excited to have both of these guests here. Can you tell me a little bit about your plan for Urban Garden, and how is it that people can actually grow fresh fruits and vegetables in their home? Because I'm sure the listeners would love to learn a little bit about that. So please tell me a little bit about your systems and how we can actually do gardening in our homes. Because we don't have a lot of land, so we have to have some other way to do it. So tell me about that.
Well, we have systems that are in place, and for the most part, we built 3 indoor labs. 2 of them are USDA registered farms. We did a proof of concept during the COVID pandemic. It was actually 4 generations of our family got together, and I learned trial and error. I am a project manager who was trained in structural engineering, and I learned a lot about, I guess, some of the rudimentary parts of mechanical engineering, structural engineering, the electrical engineering. And we took these electrical parts. We had the fluid dynamics theory going with the water that you had to go through, and the structural elements to keep things together. So basically, we took hydroponic systems, which consisted of a reservoir, a pump, some lights, and some growing shells, all without soil. And I found a way to put them together. A lot of the PVC came from a big box store, and most of the fittings came from its competitor. So it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of power tools, a lot of mistakes, but we found a way to use these systems. They've been catching on for quite some time, and the theory behind hydroponics goes way back. I mean, even back to the aqueducts. They've been around since the beginning of time. This is important for us because in an urban setting, I did hear you mention urban gardens, and about 5 years ago, we did a study. We did a survey of 5 zip codes in the Philadelphia area that had mostly African-American people, some of the most vulnerable people in the population. And we took soil samples from those areas. And we took the soil samples and had them analyzed at a certified lab. And they had some of the highest levels of metals in there that you could find. So the challenge with that was that if you have a community garden and you have soil that has high levels of toxins or metals in them, by the time you grow your food and the food gets to your plate, the the metals are bioaccumulative. And when you have lead, beryllium, arsenic in there, by the time it gets to your plate and on your fork, it's so much stronger than it was before it started. So we kind of stayed away from that option with community gardens to try to grow indoors. So you can grow indoors simply with a small pump to keep your water recirculating, a reservoir, which could even be a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket. It could be a big mixing bowl, and some lights and just some TLC.
That's very interesting because I noticed that when I worked for the city that there was high amounts of chemicals. In fact, I have an old house in West Philly, and I had a plumber come out, and the plumber told me that he had to put a new leader line into my house because he said that the line was made out of lead and that the law code didn't allow it anymore. So he said you're going to have to spend thousands of dollars replacing that line coming into your house because it's made out of lead. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And then the other issue, of course, is think about it. Just maybe like 10 or so years ago, we had unleaded gasoline. So there were
Yes,
like
they have all that.
thousands of cars that uses lead in their gas. So you have to wonder what happened to all that lead. It went into the
That's right.
soil. So it's certainly
That's right.
there. And as you know, lead is a very serious problem in terms of behavior, violence, and other issues. I know the psychologists can certainly talk about that. It makes stunts
Absolutely.
your growth, all of
Absolutely.
that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, what I was seeing in my research was that we were trying to understand again the kids' inability to focus, and a lot of people were talking about, well, it must be the technology; they're just distracted. And so my thought was, and I also knew kids were coming into our Saturday academies hungry, and so we started to provide, some traditional pizzas and that kind of stuff, but we also started to provide some greens. And what I started to notice was the healthier the food, the more they were able to stay on task.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal. I'm very excited today to have Dr. Fred Burton discussing his book, How to Outlive Your Doctor Using Alternative Medicine. I'm telling you, that's quite a topic. So we're going to learn all about how we're going to perform this feat. And like always, I always say that injustice in healthcare is the most egregious and the most inhumane. So thank you, Dr. Burton, for being here. And tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in alternative medicines and what's your background.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'll be glad to tell you the book actually is a result of people asking that question for the last 40 years. And I decided, since so many of them told me, you should write that story down, Doc, it's kind of unusual. I said, I'll do that. And after 25 years, I finally got it done. Thanks to COVID. COVID gave me the time because we had plenty of downtime. So I said, let me go ahead and finish this thing. Anyway, I grew up in South Philadelphia and went to the public school system. And when I was in high school, my father, whom I had much love and respect for, he pressed clothes for a living in Northeast Philadelphia at the Cleaners. And he worked 5.5 days a week. He worked Saturday afternoons and came home on early Saturday afternoon. But this particular Saturday in October of '64, I was in starting 11th grade. My father came home and he was jaundiced. I recognized it because I'd seen it in my uncle who had alcoholic liver disease. And we rushed him down to Pennsylvania Hospital. And they told my mother that my father had pancreatic cancer. Now, I didn't realize how deadly that diagnosis was at the time, but we certainly heard cancer and expected things were going to be bad. But long story short, my father spent 9 months in the hospital, had 2 surgeries, 2 different hospitals, and that was the beginning of his long history of having medical problems because the diabetes. So interestingly enough, most people who receive a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer are usually dead within a year or so. My father actually lived for 18 years after the diagnosis. But those are 18 tumultuous years because he had diabetes after that, led to heart disease. He lost all of his teeth. He had multiple heart attacks, later developed prostate cancer, congestive heart failure. And, you know, having watched him go through all that, I was really of the mindset that one day I'd end up just like him, because he wasn't, you know, a outlandish guy. He kept his weight down. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He didn't hang out. And I just assumed that, hey, I was in trouble because my life wasn't as good as his. But after finishing high school, I went in the military because the Vietnam War was happening. And I joined the Air Force and intending to go into computer science, but they decided I needed to be a medic, which was interesting because I had no previous interest in healthcare at all. But anyway, I took it because they worked indoors. I was interested in not working outdoors. So anyway, after 3.5 years of working in hospitals and rotating through various departments, helping to deliver babies and put on cash, drive ambulances, and do all that, I kind of satisfied what the layperson's curiosity about healthcare would be. I got to do all that. So when I got out of the military in 1971, I was kind of interested in doing something other than healthcare. I wasn't really interested. So I went to get a job, and of course, the only job I could find was working in a hospital because that was my only experience at that time. And I went along with it because it allowed me to catch up with my peers who had gone on to college while I was in the military. I got a chance to go to school during the day at community college and work in the evenings in the hospital. But a fortuitous event happened. In 1972, a year after I got out of the military, I ran into an old high school buddy who we were musicians in high school. He played trumpet, I played keyboard. We had a little combo. And while I was in the military, he was in college. And when I got out of the military, he was going to Jefferson Medical School. And we happened to run into each other each day because at that time, community college was right down the street from Jefferson Medical. And we decided that since we hadn't played our instruments in a while, we would get together and play. So we had Tuesday mornings free. We got together at my flat on the first Tuesday. It was in March of 1972. And we played for about 3 hours. We didn't even talk. We just played, had a good time. But the next Tuesday we got together, we didn't play. We talked. And he introduced me to the concept of alternative medicine. And that became my epiphany because no one had ever told me in all of my civilian or military health experience about alternative medicine. And that day gave me the first idea or inkling that I could avoid my father's many medical issues by changing my lifestyle and my diet. So he told me that day, he said, you know, you should be a doctor. Now, I thought he was nuts because I thought being a doctor was for, you know, guys who were straight A students and academic straight, you know, in high school. And, you know, like he was that kind of guy, 4-year scholarship to Temple. So I said, I don't know about being a doctor, but I like this alternative medicine thing. Let me look into that. So I spent 2 years from 72 to 74 reviewing and researching alternative medical ideas. And after those 2 years, it finally dawned on me there was nothing else I could do but be a doctor because nothing else was more interesting to me to study on a graduate school level.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal, where we recognize that injustice in healthcare is the most egregious of all issues. Today, we have as our special guest, Georges Benjamin, the Executive Director of the American Public Health Association. Dr. Benjamin has been my good friend for many different years. He goes back to the American Public Health Association when I used to go to the meetings with Dr. Walter Sue here in Philadelphia, who was one of my companions that worked with me at the Philadelphia Department of Public Health. And Dr. Benjamin Georges has had a remarkable career, which is very similar to my own. We're actually public health professionals, which is actually rare. He's also a medical doctor, and we have pretty much the same ideology in terms of what needs to be done with health, and that is that it is a public health issue, and we're going to talk about public health. Welcome, Doctor. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Dr. I can, Dr. Robinson. Thanks for having me here.
Okay,
It's
now
gonna
you
be
know
great.
something. let's start off with a very basic question, because I don't think people really know what it is. What is public health? That's the question that I want you to explain to me.
Well, public health is a concept, and the concept is what we as a society do to keep people healthy. It's part of a continuum. Obviously, when you put on the white coat and put on the stethoscope, you're providing care to people to take care of the disease that they have. But public health includes that, but it also includes all the things that we do upstream to keep people from getting sick in the first place. It has a social justice component to it. And we do such things as making sure that you get access to vaccines, make sure you get access to health care, make sure you get insurance coverage for health. We even go so far as to look at the social construct in which we live and try to make it better, because we know that 80% of what occurs that makes you healthy occurs outside the doctor's office. So we work a lot around things that people that are not medical, but we know help you become healthy.
That's very interesting. One of the things about public health, I remember how I sort of got involved with it. I was at Harlem Hospital, and I'll never remember. I'm doing my residency in internal medicine. And one of the things that I noticed is that I kept seeing the same patients over and over again. They would come in. I think I was running the sickle cell ward, and we also had the asthma clinic. And I would see those same patients. I'd patch them up and get them out, and then in a few days they would be back again. Many times they were actually worse than they were before they initially came in. And so I wondered, I'd say, well, this seems like a revolving door to me, and maybe there's some other way that I could address the issues that the people were facing at Harlem Hospital. And it wasn't just the medical aspect of their life, as you said. It was their social conditions, it was the economic and literacy issues, it was being able to comply and follow the instructions that we were trying to give them. It was a pretty complex thing, which was really outside of what we were doing in terms of our medical doctor, because basically what we were doing is we were treating disease. We weren't really doing prevention or trying to work on wellness. So I think that's an important aspect of public health. And Dr. Benjamin, I want you to talk more about that.
Yeah, we were so proud of ourselves too, right? Somebody would come in and they would be a bit overweight, and we'd write them that consult to the dietitian. And we send them out of our office thinking that we've actually done something. And the truth of the matter is that, they could go to the dietitian as many times as they wanted, but if they didn't have access to safe, affordable foods, you haven't done anything. When you got somebody who's working 2 shifts and they're getting off at 11:30 at night, and they're on their way home and they're hungry, they haven't had a chance to have dinner because they work 2 jobs, and they walk past the corner store, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but what they have in there is high fat, high salt, low nutritious foods. They're going to pig out because they're hungry. And the dietitian be damned. They love the dietitian, but that consult didn't do you any good. And of course, their weight problem didn't get resolved. Their diabetes didn't get resolved. Their high blood pressure didn't get resolved because of all the salt they were eating. And it's not that they didn't, as we say, know better, but the answer was their social condition was such that they had to get to bed, they had to get up the next morning, and going to work to feed their family was their top priority. And they cut down a little bit because the dietitian said, don't eat too much of these chips, don't eat so much of that salt. So they cut it down, but it wasn't good enough. And when I was a city health commissioner here in DC, and I remember that in the poorest part of town, for most of the time that I was in the DC area, there was not a a full service grocery store anywhere in that community.
Thank you for watching the inaugural edition of the Insightful Journal with Dr. Lawrence Robinson. Please be sure to visit our website and YouTube channel for more insightful information and insightful entertainment. See you on the next episode of the Insightful Journal.
So many times people, and they call it the yo-yo diet. So they'll lose weight, but then when the body says, "Oh, you're starving me," then it'll take every bit of fat it can and store it, and then you'll gain all of the weight back. So the whole secret to losing weight is that you have to do it very slowly, and it can't be anything special. I don't even like the term diet, because what you basically have to do is just adopt a lifestyle where you eat that way all the time, and it's not anything special that you do. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be done very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So what I suggest for people to do is don't try to do it all in one day, but just make some minor changes each time. One thing is cut the portion of the food that you eat. Get a smaller plate. Try to stay away from fats like butter, and don't fry your food. Bake the food. Take the skin off of the chicken if you're going to eat a piece of chicken. Just do little things. And that will, over time, add up. Because what you have to realize is you didn't get overweight overnight. It took a long time for you to get to the state where you are now, and it's going to take some time for you to get back to a normal, healthy weight.
Well, I'm gonna
But
be
like
honest
they
with you,
say,
Doc. Okay, I'll be honest with you, Doc. My weight started really when I started going through menopause.
yes,
And that's when I started the weight gain, because my husband always says, he said, I haven't changed my eating pattern. He says, what is causing the weight gain? And I said, it started back with menopause. Even though I had my children late in life, I still didn't get heavy. But once menopause kicked in, oh,
right.
Doc.
You know why? Your metabolism changed.
Yes. Yes.
Slowed down.
Yes.
So you're not burning the calories. So you're right. You're probably eating the same amount of calories that you ate before, but now your metabolism is much lower. So that's the reason why you're gaining the weight. And that's a normal occurrence. As you get older, your metabolism slows down. And you're going to have less activity, but also your metabolism is going to slow down.
One of the things in listening to Dr. Robinson and you, Celeste, is you got to be aware that as we age, our bodies change dramatically, and that impacts how much energy you need to take in, because food is energy. So we need to sometimes very successfully and adequately change our eating habits as we get older. They talk about in America, a good diet is 2,000 calories or 2,400 calories. But once you get past about 60, you're down to about 1,500 calories.
1,200
and
for a woman,
even down to as low as 1,200.
Mm-hmm.
And getting down that low can often be a challenge if you're sticking anywhere close to the American diet.